Okay, well, my name's Eric Butters. I'm involved with the MD of Bighorn's Heritage Resource Committee. I have the privilege today, which today being the 17th of December 2012, to be in the living room of Doug and Jill Richards to interview Doug about his family and his family's history and various other anecdotes that he might be able to provide for us. So thank you very much, Doug, for agreeing to participate in this. And I guess we probably should start at the beginning about your grandfather and when he came and from where and why and what he did when he got here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're here. And what? You're going to get up there and lay down? Yes, well, I guess at the beginning my great uncle came out here in 1902 with a fellow by the name of George Hatt. And they started a sawmill on the Morley Indian Reserve on the south side of the Bull River, east of Morley, in there someplace. And then in 1903, my great uncle talked my grandfather into coming out here with him. And my grandfather bought out George Hatt and George Hatt's interest in the mill, and they moved the mill to the north side of the Morley Indian Reserve, north of the Bull River, not too far north of where the McDougall Church stands now, up there in the hill beside a little lake. It's called Bassett Lake, and I believe at that time that they weren't very far from where there was or had been a Hudson Bay trading post. And McDougall's had built a fort in there when they came here and started their missionary work in the 1800s. And they logged there on the Indian Reserve. And from then until about the mid-1900s, or the mid-1915, somewhere in there was a recession in this country, and they pretty well went broke, the lumber business. Well, in the meantime, before that, they had also formed another partnership with a fellow in Calgary at the city planing mills, and he used to supply all lumber for building boxes and stuff in there. And then the Depression hit just before the First World War, and things, from what I've gathered from the old letters and journals that I have, things weren't very good. And my grandfather moved his family out here in 1904. And at that time, I believe there was 7 kids in the family eventually. I think there was 4 were born then, or were born before they came here. 3 were born here. My father was born in the mill house where the mill sat in 1909. He was born there, and then there was another girl and another boy. Uncle Bill was born, I think, in 1913. And it wasn't long after that well, the Depression hit. My grandmother died, and I don't know quite what they did for a little bit of a living in there. I guess they did operate the mill for a while, and into the late teens, and then I think it burnt down in about somewhere around 1920s, 21, somewhere in there. I think the mill burnt down.
So your grandfather was left alone raising 7 kids.
7 kids, yeah.
That was a bit of a trial, I suspect.
Yeah, I would imagine. The oldest one, Uncle Audley, was born in 1898, so I guess he'd have been about 16 or 17 when my grandmother died. But I don't know just how they kind of got through those kind of years. I know the girls, a couple of the older ones, they kind of moved to Calgary. My father, I know, spent, him and Uncle Bill spent several years in the Salvation Army home in Calgary for a time.
For the record, could you just give us the names of the kids, if you can remember them off?
And your grandfather?
There was Audley, Edgar, Hazel, Gladys, Dad, who was James, Agnes, and Bill.
Oh.
And they were the 7.
So the
7 children.
4 boys sort of stuck around this community quite a bit, where the girls tended to make their lives somewhere else, I think.
Yeah. 4 boys pretty well stayed here. Girls moved to Calgary. And I know that they kind of, Hazel and Gladys, and probably Gladys had quite, my Aunt Gladys had quite a bit to do with kind of raising some of the other kids when they were younger. And I know Uncle Bill stayed with Gladys and Agnes and finished his high school in Calgary. Dad, I think, went as far as grade 6. Where he acquired all his education, I'm not sure. They might have had a governess at the mill from time to time, but he never spoke much about that. Never asked him much either, I guess.
So your dad, 1909, so he'd be working age into the late 20s and 30s, I guess, and he just did what he could around here.
Yeah.
Bill is the youngest one.
He was the youngest one.
He joined the army during the Second War.
Yeah, he served in the Second World War.
Brought a bride home.
Yeah, he. I'm not sure I have all of this correct, but he told me that she was from Belgium, and he had got wounded, and not heroically or anything. Another guy dropped an ammunition box on him and broke his arms.
Things
from
happen.
from what I gathered. And when I don't know if they were that badly broken, but then they didn't send you home. They kept you around recuperated, and if you were going to could get back in action. And I was told that by that time there was parts of Belgium, I guess, that the Allied forces had taken back from the Germans or whatever. And when they were healthy enough to work but weren't healthy enough to rejoin their group, they loaned them out to some of the farmers and that to help them with their work and their haying and their farming, looking after themselves. And he was sent to this farm, which was Mariette's dad's place. And she had been married previously, and her husband had been killed in the underground resistance during the Second World War. And he met her there, and then brought her to Canada. He came back first and brought her back here later. But
So he homesteaded here and then sent for her? Is that the way it worked?
he had a homestead before the war. They homesteaded. My dad, Uncle Audley, and Uncle Bill took up homesteads here. Matter of fact, Uncle Bill's homestead is next quarter, kitty corner to this one. And Uncle Audley's is half a mile south here, where my cousin lives now. And they took those homesteads up in 35. And I was poking around in some stuff the other day, and I did find the receipt that the government had sent my dad for his $10 deposit for his homestead fees when he filed out here. And that was in 34.
Wow. So Bill sent for Mariette. Can you tell us a little bit about her trip out here?
Well, she came in 1946 when she came here. She came the year I was born, because I was born on February 24th, 1946. And she came here that spring. And I don't know, but I would assume she must have came on the ship to eastern Canada somewhere, and then on the train. And then they got to the train at Morley, and Uncle Bill knew he was coming, and he had taught an Indian fellow down here how to, Chief Walking Buffalo, to say a few words in French to welcome Aunt Mariette to Canada. So she got off the train at Morley, which I guess probably to a girl from downtown Belgium was probably quite a trip in its own right. And when she got off, he went up and welcomed her to Canada in French. And Uncle Bill picked her up there at the train. But knowing my Aunt Mariette, she was a feisty lady, so not too much would have bothered her, I don't think.
Well, so many Europeans have no concept of how big Canada is, so she probably was in for a lot more of a train ride than she bargained for, and then to be met by basically an entourage of cowboys and Indians.
Yeah. And actually barely being able to speak any English either
Well,
when she came here.
well, that's interesting. Your dad homesteaded 34, did you say?
I think he filed in 34, but I don't think they got the patent till 35. That receipt that I found said 1934 is when he sent in his $10. So when all the paperwork was done, it would be 35.
Great. And had he met your mom by this time? Or
Yes.
when did they meet and when did they get married?
I think he first met my mother in about 1931 when she was teaching school. She'd gone through normal school and she was teaching, and I believe she was staying over in Jameson Road at the Sandy Jameson place, and then every day she would ride over to what they called the Laycock place and taught the Lauder kids, Tom Lauder, who was the ancestor of all the famous chuck wagon
Yeah.
people.
Well,
And they met there, and they didn't get married till 1937.
where
There you
did
go.
Tilly Zuccolo, she was
Mhm.
then, she grew up where?
North of Cochrane. They came here, her parents actually immigrated here from Italy, and they'd gone through and had settled in BC at a place called Perry Siding, and Lemon Creek and all that over in the Slocan Valley. I don't think probably any of those little names even exist anymore. And he worked for the railroad, and then he had a brother, I think, that had came to this country. They went looking around, and then Grandpa Tom, he bought a section. I don't know whether he bought it all at once or in two pieces, but he bought a section of land north of Cochrane, just south of the Westbrook School and west a couple of miles, between Highway 22 and Horse Creek Road, on that crossroad. And my mother was, well, she was born in BC, but there were 7 kids in her family, and a couple of them were born here in Alberta, but they came here, I think, 1919.
Well,
And the first house that they stayed in till they got moved to the farm was actually, well, it is gone now, the house where they stayed in Cochrane. But it was the lot had been sold, and it was where Eddie Pears lived
yeah.
at the end. And that place became a latte coffee shop, and now it's a computer
Yeah.
shop or something, right? But the house sat on that corner, and they lived in that house before they moved out to the farm.
So what year did your mom and dad get married then?
1937,
And they,
October 27th, 1937.
1937, and then they moved on to your dad's homestead.
No, after they got married, they spent 4 or 5 years in the summertime working for Fred Brewster out of the Black Cat Ranch, taking out hunting parties and that in Jasper. And then they would winter here, but they didn't have a cabin here on this homestead at that time, but my Uncle Bill had a cabin on his quarter. And so they used to winter there. And then I think it was about 43, they bought a cabin from down on the Ghost that I believe Guy Gibson had built, or had somebody else build it for him.
Log cabin.
And I think my mother said she paid $10 or $20 for it. I'm not sure now. And they took it down and hauled it up here and set it up here, and then moved here. My sister was born in 1943, and then they were moved into the cabin about that time when she was born.